Welcome back to How China Works. I'm Brendan Davis.
And I'm Yingying Li.
And today we have a special topic episode for you. We decided that we would do these occasionally to help frame and reframe where we're going with the show next as things kind of evolve.
Today's topic is thinking ahead and outside of the box.
We thought this was especially important to talk about because as China continues to grow and evolve, the very best entrepreneurial opportunities are not always right where you would maybe expect them to be.
Right. So first, let's look at where to focus.
So speaking of those opportunities, of course, we're in Beijing, and
Right.
This is a pretty big place. And you often hear, if you're in the international world, you probably are familiar with Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, places like that. But the major cities are fairly saturated, so it helps to look outside the normal first instincts. So the second, third, fourth tier cities, there's huge opportunity there across kind of every sector, but today we're going to focus on the places where you can have the most impact if you're listening to this show.
Okay, question for you, Brandon.
Okay.
What's the population in China?
Okay, we're going to say 1.4 billion people.
Let's say, do you know how many people do not have a passport?
Well, the numbers are the vast majority in the U.S. don't have a passport, so I'm going to guess the vast majority here do not. Do you want a number?
Vast.
Do you want a number? I will take a guess, and I'll pretend I don't know. I'll guess that 70% of the people don't have a passport.
Wow.
It's way more than that, though, right?
Yes.
Okay.
The number is, it even shocked me when I first looked at this. There's 1.3 billion people here in China do not have a passport.
Wow.
Including some of my family members, to be honest.
So that's basically, again, not a math major, but that's basically 100 million people do have a passport out of 1.4 billion.
But let's think about 40 years of opening up, so many people traveling and studying abroad. But what does this number particularly mean for a continuing growing Chinese society when it comes to, at least the whole society is moving toward to a more open, and they want to at least go abroad to see what it's like, everything.
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of things to be discussed about.
Right. So there are a lot of untapped opportunities, and a lot of your recent engagement, a lot of your recent work has been talking and traveling at the intersection of some of these with the outside world and inside of China and lots of things. What have you been learning and talking about, and what's sort of what's occupying your thoughts these days?
Right. I'll first focus on what happened last 2 weeks, and I'll definitely talk about the upcoming week looks like for me, but it's really involved with this particular topic. So last 2 weeks, I traveled to a couple different cities.
Yeah.
Well, outside of Beijing is always good. Doesn't mean that I don't like. So
Get that fresh country air.
Yes, quite different. Surprisingly, a lot of areas are quite green. It's early summertime. So from south to north, you find, of course, if you're always in a coastal city, even in coastal cities, there are, of course, the first-tier cities like Guangzhou and Shenzhen, Beijing, Shanghai. But of course, there are smaller cities around, right? And when you travel to, let's say, second, third-tier cities, you feel, I'm not saying people are candor, but, you will see people are having a more burning desire in growing, in learning.
Right. They haven't had the growth yet, and so they have more of a hunger for that.
Yeah. I mean, embracing the new opportunities. I would say that's one of the characteristics of Chinese people. So that's interestingly toward to one particular event that are coming up that I'm going to speak at, Stop Grind. Stop Grind?
Right.
That brand?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Startup Grind.
Chongqing.
That's they did an event. That's where I first met Steve Hoffman, was at a Startup Grind event at Tech Temple here in Beijing 3 years ago.
Well, interestingly, for people like us, we engage with international communities. I was in Silicon Valley. I know this brand. But coming back, living in China, observing this particular international entrepreneurial ecosystem and tapping into the city where I'm going to next week is Chongqing. They have a chapter there. So when they first contacted me, I thought, well, interesting, Chongqing, right?
Yeah.
Such a quite a remote area compared with a lot of other places we mostly frequently visit.
Right.
And when I was asking them, well, is this the first event? They say, no, we have 8, 9 times.
We've been doing this for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, I think the first message here that what I notice is for a brand like Starbucks brand. I'm not trying to brand anything about it, but I just feel like
this is an unpaid endorsement.
Yeah, I definitely, I swear.
There are a lot of things like this, guys.
So interestingly, what struck me to think about is for international brands to be able to engage with Chongqing, right? Chongqing is, from my point of view, is the second or third tier of areas, but with tremendous growth potential, of course. And I personally never been there, but I think the first thing strike me is for how many international communities are right now very active in Beijing, Shanghai, those big tier cities in China, moving or start moving to or connecting with local places like Chongqing or even them smaller areas.
Do you think it's because, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of factors. I'm sure that just the general saturation of these first tier cities is part of it. But in terms of, I mean, there's human resources and there are natural resources, and there are different advantages to some of these other cities. What do you think is driving some of the move to those places? It's easy to understand why people there would want that influx of ideas and money and new opportunity. But why do you think people are going there from these bigger places?
What I see this from more objective view, I try to cool my head down and try to think about what's really going on. Of course, we mentioned about the saturation thing, right? In bigger cities, there's a lot of international brands even. But consider the number we just put out there. 1.3 billion people haven't been abroad. But, you know, I think this desire for connecting, of course, with a larger society, larger atmosphere, and larger market is very obvious. And for what? Not just the biggest thing is for information, connection, international resources. I think the most important need from those areas are education. The education, right?
So if they can't necessarily go to the world, bring the world to them a little bit more.
I think that's the opportunity also for international entrepreneurs and for expats who live in China. Even for some friends who had been English teachers here in China, well, I occasionally meet people who taught English. They're from Canada or United States. They first stop is choosing to be Zhengzhou or Luoyang or Kaifeng. That's kind of some of my cities in my province in middle of China and those areas. I feel like the world needs visionary to be able to understand where are the most opportunities are locating in certain times. So I'm quite excited about the trip next week.
That's awesome. Well, I also have a trip next week. We're coincidentally traveling, I think, on the same day, basically. And I get to go down to Luoyang. And
Luoyang, right?
Yeah, and I've been down there before, but not to Luoyang. I've been down to Henan Province several times. I've spent actually a bit of time in Anyang, and I believe Xi'an is also down there. But I
different province.
Different province. I'm sorry. Same journal. Right. They well, there's my geographical knowledge. I learned geography in American public schools, so I have to blame that. But I've been to Zhengzhou as well. So
the Asian city. Yeah, very close to where I grew up,
which is near Kaifeng, where I haven't been to your hometown. But there's this event, Legend China, which is, you know, there's legendary entertainment, legendary East. Legend China is doing an event down there in cooperation, I guess, with Wanda and a bunch of organizations.
What's the topic of the event?
Well, it's the Legend China International Film Forum, and it's a one-day symposium with panels, guest speakers. They have a keynote speaker who I don't know who that is yet, but there are 3 panels discussing. The first panel is the New Age of Hollywood China. The second is dealing with India and China. And the third has to do with production and investment specifics. And I'm going to speak on 1 or 2 of those panels, the first and or third. But specifically, one of the bullet points we were talking before we started recording And as we wanted to get into this topic, one of the points is about the advantages and opportunities in second and third tier cities in China. And so how to take advantage of that. And
Quite
so they're
interesting.
speaking to the international experts as well as the big city people, whether they're Chinese or international. They're speaking to the filmmaking community here in Beijing, Shanghai, and trying to get those people, whether they're Chinese or international people, there. And there are a lot of opportunities. And the one thing I'll say about that before we move on is that, for instance, there is often in most of these, basically every city pretty much has this, to my understanding, but there are these cultural development funds, and there's a certain amount of money that the local governments, as well as the provincial governments, a step higher, have to invest in arts and entertainment. They have more of an arts focus than entertainment. Specifically, hopefully, the art is entertaining as well. And commercial viability used to not be a factor. It used to be absolutely just about, we want to help to tell and improve the story of China and this place. But now there has been a focus where they needed to not be a loss leader. They needed to not just be something they do to improve or educate people, but to also be revenue positive. And so I won't get too granular on my event, but that's really the focus. And my previous engagement down in Anyang was about developing a big international film with my old company. Those people are still trying to get it together, and it's very much a Chinese production. So that's another topic, but basically that's why we're having this event. That's why this event is going on, and I'm happy to get in there and add my tu kwai to the conversation.
One thing I do observe during the engagement with cities like that and events happening there, it drives me to think about, okay, what is really the need, and what is the real value out of this particular event.
Right.
You know, when we are collecting a group of people together in that specific culturally rich cities, like we are pointing out, like, for example, Chongqing and Luoyang, many other areas in China are not necessarily the first tier or second tier. They could be very culturally rich, but they are not discovered. Right. The reasons why they are not discovered could be many.
Sure, geography is one.
Yeah. And you see, let's talk about the gaps in between what is really there and what is how the world view it and not knowing it.
Or if they view it at all, right?
I feel like it takes direct understanding or engagement or communication to do so. Because I could give one particular small example. When I was sitting in a smaller city, I'm not going to mention which one, but it's close to our big tier city, sitting at a lunch table with a group of people which we are saying the events decision maker or policy maker, those kind of people putting this event together, organizers. It's very interesting if you could utilize, of course, I mentioned cultural intelligence. The big part is the communication skills you apply into getting out of it. Because it's very easy for us to take our perception in the meeting and out of the meeting, which is, okay, this is going to be like this level meeting with this level kind of people we're talking to. So that kind of perception will actually hinder us.
That shapes what you said. That limits, in a way, what you say. Because, if I'm talking to the local heads, they want to hear a certain high-level thing. Right. And they're going to trust other people to do the actionable details later, etc. So.
Yeah. And people, including even Chinese people, when you talk about big cities, Shanghai and Beijing, well, immediately the attention will be paid to a certain group of people and certain details. But if you go to a smaller tier city, it doesn't mean they're not good enough, but they're very eager. There's a lot of information you could tap into once you apply your communication skill and cultural intelligence, right?
Absolutely. And this reminds me, I was just having this conversation with actually Kevin Geiger, of all people, who we know well. And to paraphrase this succinctly, it had to do with what often hinders, again, in my industry, but this applies to many industries, where there's an international expertise that's often desired to train people to get the local experts, at international standards. And that is that there is the cultural aspect. I'm reminded of like how back when Mao Nixon, connected and how it worked. Mm-hmm. There's a project I'm involved in the research, and the central takeaway, it finally worked because the communication was from ahead, through ahead, to ahead. It was Nixon talking to the president of the Philippines, talking to then Chairman Mao. And so it worked ultimately because they were at this level. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's, geopolitics at that level is not the focus of this show, but that same cultural expectation, unfortunately, sometimes it hinders everything because, and again, I've experienced this a lot, that, in the reality, again, in my industry, and it, again, true in many other industries, is that people besides the CEO or the absolute pinnacle top 5 people in the business, those other people have value. Yeah. Other people get things done. And so there has to be an understanding that other people have value. And just the same thing, by the same token, these smaller cities have huge value. Mm-hmm. And so respecting the local people and also respecting people who are leaders, but maybe they're not the person who is leading the parade. They're people who are working and professional and they have a lot to offer. Basically, being able to open up communication is the big challenge. And the only way we can solve that is through greater education of how different industries work. And that actually sort of leads us to the second piece of this, I think.
Before the second piece, we want to focus on very important topics we want to share with today. It's about education. But I think with what we just described, that particular situation happens a lot.
Right.
I kind of see the dilemma there.
Yeah.
It's like a vicious circle. So it's because the unnecessary cultural expectation so that people do not act in taking the efforts of communicating more actively or engaging. Sometimes even very subtle, in a very subtle thing. I was at a dinner, but half international friends, audience, half this Chinese organizers, for example.
Yeah.
It's so real. It's so like dramatic every single time. I'm sure most of our listeners have, if you ever engaged with China, you will felt that the bridge is desperately needed.
Right.
And not just interpreter, but it's more like who can lubricant.
Right.
This particular mean, or it's going to be super awkward.
Exactly.
But the point here is we need to believe. And then we can see that's a reality. We need to believe if you can do a little bit, for example, we can see very simple. If we think, because we were sitting there, we're thinking, okay, this guy, we're not going to communicate because you see, very different kind of industry, real different hierarchy, very different language. I'm not going to spend any efforts in engaging with him. But generally speaking, that kind of setting is tremendously valuable.
Sure.
Even just half an hour or 1 hour lunch together.
Absolutely.
Besides exchanging business card and exchanging WeChat, adding each other, what else you can do in the tremendously 30 minutes? You can really build a rapport. You can tell a joke. You can make one story about you personally. You can let the other person introduce their hometown.
Yeah.
So many things, a little trick thing you could do to educate or help other people to form a better connection.
Absolutely. It takes both sides understanding that you have to start somewhere, and how do you start? Like, what's the way to do it? And so this is where we can refer people back to season 1 of How China Works.
Drinking culture.
Exactly. Exactly. That first week is all about the business dinner and the drinking and the cultural communication. So yes, please check that out. Actually, I had a new friend mention that he just discovered. We just met, and so he just went back and discovered our show. Oh, wow. And he has been speed listening to all of season 1 on double speed to get it in his head. He said, I've been here a year, and I wish I'd studied this a year before I came. So I'm glad. So hey, buddy, I'm glad that helped you. And hopefully this will help other people. So where we have these two main focuses of our show, and the one is improving China/international cooperation and communication, and the second is helping the younger Chinese folks, the Chinese youth, to go global. And so what are some of those sectors, and we already teased the one, but where the English-speaking Chinese youth especially, where they can have the most impact?
Right. Before I get in the details of some keywords, I really want to share during my observation last couple of days. I felt like education has always been playing one of the most important roles in driving Chinese people embracing what the world looks like.
Yeah.
And most recently, there's a term called international education, 国际教育. You know, think about what international education means for Chinese.
Yeah.
Without opening up, that's even not a possibility. But right now, after 40 years, especially in the last 10 years or 5 years, you see tremendously, of course, in China, there are tons of international schools, but that's just part of it. Most recently, the need for Chinese people getting more informed outside of China brings a huge lucrative industry, as you probably already know.
Sure.
And Chinese people, we talked about in our last season about pay for knowledge, right? Model online.
Yeah,
right?
I have a lot of friends who work at or run some of the big education companies, and then of course a lot of the younger people have started there as their first job into China.
So this topic is very endearing to me because I grew up in a family of teaching. And I have been always observing how this particular international exchange or global education could shape Chinese. Honestly, this is something that I value truly and I benefit from it. But it's disheartening sometimes to see how it's played in China, in the market, even though it's very profitable. I could mention starting back then over 12, 15 years back, there's the New Oriental School. Right, Xindongfang. It's legendary name for helping Chinese people, us Chinese students going overseas for study, for education.
Yeah.
And years passed, or at least 1 decade passed. You see tremendous, there's so many brand competitors and new kind of education technology companies are trying to provide that driving that sector. But what I see, if all the other industry has to evolve to a level of with more ecosystem, like what Tencent, Alibaba, and Baidu has built.
Yeah.
They build their ecosystem of commerce, ecosystem online shopping, everything. But if you think education, business, as an industry, there hasn't been a very systematic way to really take education as a whole system to the next level when it comes to providing valuable value exchange for Chinese students. I feel like that's something, of course, has been discussed for years. But most recently, I see some new discussion popping up. And that's related to, because as we know, economy getting slower. And not just in China, but many places in the world. So investors start thinking about what are the ways, what are the possible runway, right? What are the possible paths for them to focus on, at least to safely speaking.
Yeah.
So education was picked by some of the giants. Especially there's a report coming up this morning by Tencent. Tencent invests hugely on the new vocational education. What does it mean? Because, of course, AI development drives us to thinking about job replacement, what education look like in the near future.
Yeah.
But most importantly, the investors, the giants, are not waiting. They are actually seeing if there's any possibility they could invest in this huge market with or without the economic slowing down.
Right.
I feel like the words 新职业教育 or 教育在线教育, the online education and the new vocational training or education are the words popping up again.
Okay.
But this is a very interesting topic. It's not like the last couple years, like OFO, like a mobile business that is happening so quick and getting off so quick, right?
Yeah.
But education is different thing. Fundamentally, it's about shaping people.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the best way. I mean, this has been said a lot. And so anything I say is going to sound like a cliche because it's all been said. But education is the best and really the only way to truly increase your optionality for the future. So as we deal with these, with the impact of AI and automation and machine learning and the impacts on people, regardless of your skills. So again, all the reports are that X number of doctor or medical positions and lawyer positions those jobs will be filled by AI tools that can do certain diagnostic or mechanical or rote things so much better. Amazon's warehouses in the U.S., these are not the real numbers, but this makes the point, because I can't remember the real number off the top of my head, but that the average Amazon warehouse at some point in the near future, like 3 to 5 years, well, it'll be a 100, 200,000 square foot warehouse, depending on where it is, and will maybe have a dozen employees because it's like the people in charge and a handful of people, security guards at the doors will be half the employees, and it'll be the driverless trucks that are docking in the employeeless warehouse where there are robots, and the people working there are going to be very high level people, whether they're operational, logistical, executive people, and the tech people making sure the robots are running like they're supposed to run, and it's going to run 24 hours a day.
Yes.
So maybe you have two shifts of the humans who are really high-level manager, tech, or executive people, and then otherwise what used to be hundreds to thousands of jobs just aren't there. And so how do you deal with that? Mm-hmm. And education won't solve all the problems, but it's the only way to solve some of the problems.
Right. AI automation is one of the biggest topics in education because that's connected with job replacement and people discussing a lot about when it comes to AI and education. That's one thing. Another thing maybe is also much discussed in the AI field is about the data breach, the leak. Data leak it's going to be a problem worldwide, not just China. But when it comes to replacement, everybody's talking, but I feel like, have you heard about the metaphor of blind man touching the elephant? You know that, right? So I feel the society right now is entering a mold that we're all the blind man, basically. Yeah, we are sort of like expert in some way, like in education or internationalization, but without truly connecting the multiple disciplinary fields and work deeply or have first-hand experience, it's truly hard to give conclusion. Last week, I was visiting several factories in China, including Land Rover. I went there. I'm so amazed for the giant warehouse. Machines coordinate beautifully in making the cars. We were visiting there, and of course not photo allowed, so that's why we walk for the whole warehouse, starting to see how these machines are so beautifully coordinated to finalize a car, and to use all the machine. Right. I think the company was ABB and from Germany. Okay. Right, I guess because machinery and is called precision machinery, and is unimaginable because there's not so many people involved in that. Yeah, roughly how many people were like on the floor? Were there very few people relative to the amount of machines and cars? Yeah, less than 10% in the whole warehouse. Wow. It's just amazing. Yeah. And what does it mean? We also see in China right now, like in Beijing, and 2 days ago, I was at an event. I met a guy who happened to tell me that he has been involved in setting up an AI education center in one of the universities here in China, in Beijing. So when I asked what does it mean, and he just gave me some details like, they have very little money, and I'm thinking about getting a different job. He's not thinking of it from a philosophical point of view. He's looking
at it like just any other job, but it's so much more than that.
Which means the new challenges arise.
Yeah.
New challenges arise when it comes to even this particular topic about how
people have to think about it properly.
Yeah, you can't. Even the problem solvers, people jump on creating solutions, may not even think that they may cause more damage to this kind of creation. So that's something we really need to drive attention.
Right. So people have to become smarter about how they approach this because, again, you can read tens of thousands of interesting articles right now if you get on the internet, but essentially all the projections about the impact this will have on the world, people have different timelines of when things will look like a science fiction movie for us, but it's sooner than later. It's a lot sooner than later where we're just truly not going to recognize, like from where we sit today, we're not going to recognize the world anymore. And so how do you deal with that? That's the big topic.
Again, I still feel like for the purpose of our show, how China works, we just do not want to focus on specifics like the food and the culture, the history. I think it's important we collaboratively working with our audience together to drive the thinking of the future.
Well, that's absolutely what I was going to say is, I'm a subject matter expert in about two things and none of them are these. So what we will continue to do with this show as we move forward is to put a focus on what are the right questions to ask and how to approach a changing situation. The specifics are up to the people who are experts in that specific subject matter. Yeah. But in terms of the communications and how to orient your thinking to the world, that's where we can help, as we can help show the problems and try to help offer the best solutions that we have unearthed from guests.
As a matter of fact, thinking is the most important skill that we want to focus on talking about here today when it comes to education. And that's where the opportunity comes from for international education participants. Mm-hmm. When I say so, why it's so important? Again, let's go back to our logic, to our idea of creation of this show, right? We want, of course, East meet West. So what does it mean, East meet West? There's philosophies coming from the West, also from the East. So when we actually putting these two together, we have to understand we're not trying to compare or find which philosophical direction is right, but the best thing is to be able to tell the facts from the opinion and really make it relevant to make the audience understand. Certain thing to remind is a logic and critical thinking, right? That's one important thing that Chinese kids, the education on them is super in need of reforming. It has been years, but thinking about how critical thinking could naturally happen among that environment where Chinese education focuses on so much on, let's say, like exams,
rote learning,
everything.
Right.
It's much better right now. It's much better.
It's changing.
But consider the number of the population of students in China. There's so many students need to be granted with this particular little bit of power, light, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So there's only thing. Or you can do international education outside of China. But again, 1.3 billion people do not have passport.
Right.
It will grow, but it's very, very slow.
Sure.
But the thing is, how could billions of people here in China, millions of students, and starting like 10, 20 years old, of course, everything right now is they have to face the challenge of digitalization, like we mentioned many times. But how could they realize, could be engaged with this critical thinking, this education on helping them to form that kind of future-oriented and critical thinking, independent thinking, so that they can make decisions for themselves, be a better person.
And that gets us back to the topic we started with at the beginning, which is thinking ahead and thinking outside the box, because those two things are required to be able to meet these challenges as we move forward.
That's why I'm very happy to see if there's any, like, people like you coming to Luoyang, and people like me and Starbucks brands or many other brands. International communities do not just focus on Beijing, Shanghai, just focus on fundraising and building startups in that area, in the metropolitans. But think about, will that represent China? There's so many different level of lives in China. If the international audience or founders could gather the courage to go to those areas to form all kinds of project relationships, it might pave a way or pioneer a new way, a type of possibility where more people will follow, will see there's a possibility, will go that direction. Because sometimes if you don't open the door, people don't see the light, they will not even knock the door.
Absolutely.
If someone courageous enough to knock the door, and I think this is very natural, this is natural law, and people will start saying, wow, I can do that too. We gotta call for leaders to do that.
Right. We have to see what's possible. I mean, most of us learn by following an example that's been set before us, or at least seeing something that sparks your own thinking. So we need to highlight and continue to highlight the people who are leading and not simply trying to capitalize on existing opportunities, but who are looking ahead to see how things are changing and are going to be there waiting as they change, and they're not trying to play catch up.
Honestly, when it comes to this particular show, when I look back, I feel one word keep coming to me these days: magic. When I say magic, what does it mean? Doing this show, of course, we put a lot of efforts on it, and it gave us more possibilities to connect with so many cross-cultural, interesting people who has been, even it helped me discover so many people live in China 20, 30 years ago. They have become Chinese, but of course keep some of their nature and identity, but doing tremendously. In the story, I feel the urge that we feel how China works could provide their platform. So we will find them. We will help them to share and shine.
Well, I'm excited to continue doing that with my co-host, Yingying Li. We'll have, do you have any last thoughts as we sort of move into the home stretch here?
I would just say what I just shared would totally come from my bottom part. It's not because I drink too much coffee.
She does have the coffee, but that's not too much. That's the appropriate amount. I would even go with another one if I were you.
That's my energy level, totally.
Fantastic. Well, we're glad we got the chance to do this. We are going to continue to these special topic episodes again, as there is something that's going to, because we know some of the guests we have on the books for the next few shows, and we know what we're involved in, and we see what's in the air. And this is the kind of topic, we're putting our own label on it, but this is the sort of topic that's in the air locally as people look ahead to get things done. We have another great guest coming up next week. I want to remind everybody to please visit howchinaworkspodcast.com. We have all kinds of information about the show. You can find all the episodes linked in there and embedded. There are show notes now and resources. We've linked many of the articles and things we've done for research over the past 2 seasons of the show. And don't forget, please share the show, rate us, review us. We're available on all the popular podcatchers are online. So wherever you get the show, wherever you listen to us, we really appreciate it and that we hope you're enjoying it. So I'm Brendan Davis.
And I'm Yingying Li. Thanks so much for listening. See you next week on How China Works.